My parents forced me to give up my room to my golden child sister. Now they want a place in my house. My name is Blake. I'm 28 years old. I moved out at 18, and after 10 years of hard work, I finally bought my dream home, a space I could truly call my own, a sanctuary for peace. But I'm here to tell the story of how that peace quickly faded once my family learned about my new home. It's a story of favoritism, sacrifice, and the extent people go to in order to keep you bound to old commitments you never agreed to. Growing up, it was clear I wasn't the favored child. That spot was firmly taken by my younger sister, the golden child. She could do no wrong, while I was always a convenient second option. For as long as I can remember, our family dynamics were set. If there was ever competition for attention, privileges, or resources, she would always win. A perfect example happened when I was 16. I was thrilled to finally have my own room upstairs after years of sharing, which felt like a major milestone. But as soon as my sister turned 13, my parents decided she deserved that room instead. Their reasoning? She was growing fast and needed more space. Just like that, I was demoted to a cramped basement room with barely enough space for my bed and desk. That's when I understood that if I wanted anything in life, I'd have to get it myself. So, I dedicated myself to my studies and saved every penny I earned from part-time jobs. I wasn't about to rely on my family. By the time I turned 18, I was out of there, heading to college on scholarships and the small savings I had managed to build. I stayed in contact with them, of course, but always kept some distance enough to maintain peace, yet not close enough to get pulled back into that old web. Meanwhile, the golden child didn't exactly choose the most productive path after high school. She drifted from one thing to another, lacking direction or drive. She quickly moved back in with my parents, who weren't thrilled but never pushed her to get her act together. Instead, they made endless excuses for her, saying things like, she's just trying to find her passion or she needs time to figure things out. It was frustrating, but I stayed out of it, focusing on building my own life. Over the next decade, I steadily advanced in my career. Eventually, I reached a place where I could afford something special, a house, a real reward for all those years of pushing myself. It was everything I had dreamed of: spacious, filled with natural light, and most importantly, all mine. For the first time in my life, I felt a true sense of achievement. But that peace didn't last. Word of my new home eventually got back to my family, and almost immediately, I noticed a shift. It began with an unexpected call from my parents, feigning surprise over my purchase. They sounded almost shocked, as if they hadn't thought I'd ever reach this point. They congratulated me, but quickly started dropping hints about wanting to see the place. I wasn't thrilled, but figured a brief visit wouldn't hurt, so I invited them over for the weekend. When they arrived, it wasn't the warm visit I had hoped for. The entire time, they walked around with judgmental looks, picking apart everything from the decor to my choice of furniture. My mom even went so far as to imply the house was too big for a single person and hinted that it could be a family home if I ever wanted to invite people back into my life. I tried to brush it off, thinking they were just adjusting to the idea of me having something this nice. But then they took it a step further. My dad brought up my sister's situation, casually mentioning that she'd been going through a rough patch and could use a break. He hinted that maybe my sister could stay in one of the guest rooms just for a while to help her get back on her feet. It was a bold suggestion, considering my sister had made no effort to improve her situation for years. I couldn't believe they would ask me to open my home, my sanctuary, to the very person who'd always been handed everything while I had to fight for every bit. I instantly said no, not even bothering to give them an explanation. I simply told them it wasn't going to happen. That's when my mother's expression changed. She launched into a rant about how they had sacrificed so much for me over the years, given me everything, and how they couldn't believe I would be so selfish. It felt as though they were blaming me for wanting to protect the one thing I had worked so hard for. After they left, I assumed the issue would die down, that they'd eventually understand. But a few days later, I received a letter in the mail, a long, emotional plea from my parents urging me to reconsider and help my family in their time of need. They painted my sister as someone who had fallen on hard times through no fault of her own and made it seem like my duty to step in. At that point, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I decided to share my story online, hoping for an outside perspective. The responses were overwhelming, with countless people urging me to stand firm. It was the validation I needed to keep my boundaries strong. But my family wasn't ready to give up just yet. That letter turned out to be only the beginning, as they continued pushing to see just how much of my life I was willing to sacrifice to make them happy. This story wasn't over, in fact. It was only just beginning. Update 1. After I posted my story online, I thought maybe my family would realize I wasn't going to give in. But things only escalated. It started with texts from my parents, one after another, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, urging me to reconsider and reminding me that family is all we have in the end. I ignored them, hoping they'd take the hint, but the messages kept coming, each one more desperate, saying it was my duty to help the family after all they'd done for me. When I didn't respond, they escalated things. My mother messaged me, accusing me of being ungrateful, reminding me that they'd always shared their home with me, as if she'd forgotten how I'd spent my teenage years cramped in a tiny basement room so my sister could have my old space. That one stung, but I still didn't reply. I could sense they were trying to wear me down, making it seem like every sacrifice they'd ever made was solely for my benefit. Finally, I reached out to a few close friends to get their perspective. I wanted to be sure I wasn't overreacting by refusing to give in. Every single one of them agreed my family was overstepping. One friend even said it seemed like my family only cared about my sister's comfort and were now trying to guilt me into fixing her mistakes. Another pointed out how they hadn't shown much interest in me until I bought the mansion. Hearing this gave me the clarity I needed, and for the first time I felt I had a real support system outside my family. Then, unexpectedly, I got a message from my sister, the first one in years. She'd never reached out before, not even for holidays. Her message was brief, with a generic apology for the past and a request to stay at my place temporarily. No real explanation, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, just a vague apology and a request. It felt insincere, like she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. So I responded with a polite but firm no, explaining that I wasn't responsible for her choices. That's when everything escalated. Within minutes, she was sending message after message, accusing me of thinking I was too good for the family, calling me cold-hearted and selfish. She hurled every insult she could think of, accusing me of being stuck up and saying I'd forgotten where I came from. I could practically feel the anger in her words, and it became obvious that this wasn't about needing a place to stay, it was about me denying her what she wanted. Then my parents started calling, leaving voicemails expressing their disappointment and claiming they had raised me to put family first. They dredged up old memories from my childhood, as if to convince me of all they'd supposedly done for me. It felt like they were rewriting history to paint themselves as perfect, selfless parents while ignoring all the years I felt like an afterthought. I thought about blocking them but couldn't bring myself to do it. Despite everything, cutting them off entirely felt extreme. Part of me still hoped they'd realize they were pushing too hard and eventually back off, but that hope didn't last long. Their constant messages began wearing me down. It got so bad that I struggled to focus at work, checking my phone every few minutes to see if they'd sent another guilt-tripping text. My mind kept drifting back to their words, and I started questioning myself, wondering if maybe I was being too harsh. But then I'd reread my friends' texts encouraging me to stand firm, and it would boost my resolve again. One afternoon, things took an unexpected turn. I was at work, deep in a report, when my phone started buzzing incessantly. Assuming it was more texts, I ignored it until I noticed a missed call from the front desk. Moments later, a coworker approached me, looking uncomfortable. She quietly informed me that my parents were in the lobby, demanding to see me. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't even told them where I worked, so they must have asked around or searched for me online. I went down to the lobby, hoping to quickly diffuse the situation, but as soon as I entered, they started in on me. My mother was near tears, loudly accusing me of abandoning my family, while my dad stood nearby, arms crossed, glaring at me like I was some ungrateful stranger. They didn't care that other people were watching. They wanted me to feel guilty, even humiliated. It was so loud that eventually a coworker stepped in, asking them to leave. That didn't go over well, my dad argued, claiming they were there on family business and that I owed them. But my coworker remained calm, firmly reminding them that this wasn't the time or place and asking them to respect the workplace. They left, but not without a parting jab. My mother called out, saying she'd raised me better than this. Her voice echoed through the lobby as they walked out, leaving me standing there, embarrassed and exhausted. My coworker tried to comfort me, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder, but it didn't help. That evening, when I got home, I knew I needed to update my Reddit post. I shared everything: the messages, the surprise visit, and the public confrontation at my workplace. The support I received was overwhelming, with countless people urging me to stay strong and reminding me that boundaries with family are essential. It was a relief to know I wasn't alone, that others had faced similar struggles. Reading the comments, I felt a renewed determination. I couldn't keep letting them drag me back into the same cycle. This was my life, and I had to protect my peace, even if it meant standing up to the people who were supposed to love me most. Update 2: after the incident at my job, things only got worse. My parents took their tactics to a new level, deciding to involve the rest of the family. I didn't expect them to go this far, but one morning I woke up to a series of notifications. My parents had posted a long, emotional message on Facebook, portraying me as a cold, ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her family despite all they'd done for me. The post was carefully crafted, designed to pull on the heartstrings of anyone who didn't know the full story. They spoke of all the sacrifices they'd made, raising me with so much love, and described how heartbroken they were that I was refusing to help them now in their time of need. They even hinted as though they had supported me financially well into adulthood, something that was completely untrue. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Messages from extended family poured in, filled with confusion, judgment, and disappointment. Some were simple questions, asking what was going on, but most were blunt accusations, calling me selfish, asking how I could turn my back on family after all they'd done for me, and accusing me of forgetting my roots. The worst part was that these weren't just from distant relatives I rarely spoke to, but from family members I'd once been close with, who were now quick to take my parents' side. My parents' posts spread quickly, and soon even distant cousins I hadn't seen in years were sending messages, judging me without understanding the real situation. An aunt, who'd been especially close to my mom, messaged me saying she couldn't believe I was putting my family through all of this. They rallied behind the story my parents spun, casting me as the villain who abandoned my family. As messages flooded in, I thought about sharing my side but hesitated, worried it might seem petty or stir up more drama. Their post was already public, and adding to the spectacle felt humiliating, so I decided to wait, hoping the situation would calm down on its own. When I confided in my friends, they were as shocked as I was. They encouraged me to ignore it, reminding me that those who truly knew me would understand. But despite their support, the pressure from family grew, and I began to waver. Each day brought new messages about the importance of family, subtly suggesting that I was to blame for my parents' distress. Then my parents took it even further, reaching out to old family friends who'd known me as a child but were uninvolved in my adult life. My parents told them the same tale they'd shared with the family, depicting me as someone who turned my back on them in their time of need. Soon, those family friends also began sending me messages filled with guilt-inducing words. It was as if my parents were determined to keep pushing until I relented, but the idea of caving felt like a betrayal of everything I had worked for. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into letting someone into my home who had never once tried to help herself. I seriously began considering going no contact. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the only way to regain control over my life. I'd been holding out, hoping they would eventually understand, but the social media post was a line crossed, and it didn't seem like they'd turn back. So I finally blocked my parents and sister on all platforms, deciding enough was enough. I posted a short, calm message on my own social media, explaining that I needed privacy and wouldn't discuss family matters publicly. I kept it vague, simply setting a boundary. The responses varied. Some relatives messaged to say they respected my choice, but others weren't as supportive. A few left passive-aggressive comments, hinting that I'd changed or forgotten my roots. It hurt, but I knew I couldn't keep bending to please everyone. On a friend's suggestion, I decided to seek counseling to help process everything. I found a therapist who specialized in family dynamics, and in our first session I knew this would help. We discussed setting boundaries and prioritizing my mental health, things I'd always struggled with around my family. Just when I thought things were settling down, my parents sent another message through a distant relative, hinting they might take legal action, claiming I owed them for years of support. The idea was absurd, but I couldn't just ignore it. I updated my Reddit post to share the latest development, and the outpouring of support was immense. People offered advice, shared similar experiences, and even suggested legal steps if things escalated. Every comment strengthened my resolve to maintain my boundary. My therapist urged me to stay focused on protecting my peace, reminding me that this wasn't about revenge but about self-care. Knowing I wasn't alone and that others had gone through similar situations made me feel stronger. This wasn't just about standing up to my family, it was about finally taking control of my own life. Update 3. Just when I thought it couldn't get more chaotic, a letter from a lawyer representing my parents arrived. It demanded repayment for years of support and living expenses. The whole thing read like a joke, but they were serious. They'd itemized supposed expenses from when I was a kid, attaching exaggerated amounts. This was ridiculous, especially since I'd left home at 18 and had been financially independent since. I realized then that I needed legal help to end this nonsense. I hired a lawyer who reviewed the letter with me. After going over everything, my lawyer assured me there was no legal basis for their claims. They couldn't claim these alleged expenses as a debt I owed. However, my lawyer advised caution, suggesting I keep documentation in case they pushed further. On my lawyer's advice, I dug through old records to find proof of all the financial support I had actually provided to my family over the years, including money I'd sent home during college when my parents claimed they needed help with bills. Then, just when I thought I'd prepared for everything, my sister sent a scathing message accusing me of tearing the family apart and claiming my pride was ruining everyone's lives. She ranted about how I thought I was too good to help family, calling me selfish and greedy. She clearly had no idea how much I'd already sacrificed and worked for on my own. Ignoring her wasn't easy, but I refused to be dragged back in. To my surprise, I received a private message from a cousin soon after. She had seen the fallout on social media and wanted to let me know she understood what I was going through. She shared that she, too, had felt the sting of my parents' favoritism toward my sister and had distanced herself for similar reasons. Her support felt like a huge relief, and it triggered an unexpected chain reaction. Other relatives who had once stayed distant from my family started reaching out as well. They acknowledged the favoritism, some even apologizing for not speaking up sooner, admitting they hadn't known how to help. Gradually, the public narrative my parents tried to build began to fall apart. Family members who initially took my parents' side started to see things more clearly, refraining from quick judgments. My parents didn't handle this shift well. They doubled down, posting yet another long message on Facebook claiming I was lying about my childhood, twisting history to make it seem like I owed them everything. They were trying to paint themselves as perfect parents who had done everything for me. They were all rallying behind the story my parents had crafted, portraying me as the villain who had turned my back on family. As message after message came in, I thought about posting my side of things, but I hesitated, worried it might seem petty or fuel the drama further. My parents' post had been public, and it was already embarrassing without my adding to it, so I decided to wait, hoping the storm would calm on its own. When I shared all this with my friends, they were as shocked as I was. They urged me to ignore it, saying anyone who really knew me would understand. Their support meant a lot, but the relentless family pressure continued, and I started to doubt my decision. Every day brought more messages emphasizing the importance of family or subtly implying that I was responsible for my parents' suffering. Then my parents took things up a notch. They began reaching out to old family friends, people who had known me as a child but were not part of my adult life. They shared the same narrative, painting me as someone who abandoned them in their time of need. Soon, even these family friends were reaching out, echoing the guilt-ridden messages I'd already been getting from relatives. The more this continued, the angrier I felt. It seemed they would keep pushing until I finally gave in, but after all they'd put me through, the idea of giving in felt like betraying myself. I refused to let them manipulate me into supporting my sister out of a situation she created. At that point, I seriously started considering going no contact. I knew it would be difficult, but it felt like the only way to reclaim my peace. I had clung to a hope that they'd eventually realize they were pushing too far and back off. But the social media post had crossed a line, and I doubted they would turn back. So, I made a final decision. I blocked my parents and sister on every platform, deciding I'd had enough. However, I didn't want to leave things without some closure, so I put up a short, calm message on my own social media, stating that I needed privacy and wouldn't be discussing personal family matters online. I avoided going into details, simply setting a boundary and leaving it at that. The responses varied. Some family members messaged to say they understood and respected my choice, while others were less supportive. A few even left passive-aggressive comments, hinting that I had lost my way or changed. It stung, but I knew I couldn't keep bending over backward to please everyone. At a friend's suggestion, I looked into counseling to help me process everything. I found a therapist who specialized in family dynamics, and after our first session, I could tell it would be helpful. We discussed setting boundaries and prioritizing my mental health concepts I had always struggled with around my family. Just as I thought things might calm down, my parents tried another approach they called my workplace, attempting to cause trouble for me. Fortunately, my boss knew about the situation and dismissed them without giving any information. Later, he pulled me aside to make sure I was okay and reassured me they wouldn't tolerate anyone harassing their employees. After everything, I felt a newfound clarity. My family had tried to manipulate, guilt trip, and even legally threaten me, but none of it worked. For the first time, I felt free from their influence, as if a door had finally closed. I posted an update on Reddit, recounting the latest developments and expressing my gratitude for the community's support. The responses poured in, with people offering more encouragement and legal advice, which I took seriously. The show of solidarity and shared experiences fortified my decision to hold firm. Knowing I wasn't alone made a difference. It had been a long, painful journey, but I finally felt I was moving toward a life free from their control. Update 4. Just as I believed things couldn't escalate further, my parents took their behavior to a new level. One evening, I logged into Facebook to find a public post from them laying out every complaint they had about me for the world to see. They claimed I was abandoning them after they raised me on their own, detailing supposed sacrifices they'd made and insinuating I owed them for their investment in my future. It was a flood of accusations painting me as the ungrateful child who had turned my back on the very people who'd made me who I was. The comment section was just as unpleasant. Extended family members were divided, with some defending me and others siding with my parents, preaching that family loyalty should come first. The people who sided with my parents were furious, acting as though I owed them some kind of inheritance payback, claiming my success was only possible because of the opportunities my parents had supposedly provided. Then, as if things weren't chaotic enough, my cousin reached out with a bombshell. She shared that my parents were facing serious financial trouble, largely due to their own poor choices. Apparently, they had been relying heavily on my sister, the golden child, to turn her life around and help them financially. But her reckless behavior and spending habits only made things worse. They had pinned all their hopes on her, despite knowing she wasn't responsible or reliable, and now, with no one else to turn to, they decided I was the next best option. With this new information, I began sifting through my old financial records, determined to find proof of every time I'd contributed to them in the past. I was able to uncover receipts and records from years ago, showing that I had sent them money for things like utility bills or groceries during my college years. These weren't huge amounts, but they were proof that I had contributed more than they ever acknowledged. Having this record helped me feel even more justified in setting boundaries. Things weren't calming down, though. Every day brought a new wave of messages from relatives, either berating me or insisting I make things right with my parents. I leaned heavily on my close friends during this time, who reminded me that I wasn't obligated to fix the financial mess my family had created, and that I had every right to live my life without being dragged into their drama. Their support kept me steady as the situation grew worse. Then I found out my parents had taken things even further by contacting authorities. They'd filed a complaint accusing me of elder neglect, claiming I had a duty to support them financially and was failing to do so. The authorities looked into it briefly but dismissed the case almost immediately, telling my parents that I wasn't legally obligated to support them and that this was a family matter, not a legal one. Hearing this was a relief, but it also showed me how far they were willing to go. The biggest shock came in the form of a message from my sister. She sent an ultimatum demanding that I give her one of the guest rooms in my mansion for as long as she needed it, saying it was the least I could do after all she had put up with growing up. She acted as though she was entitled to a permanent place in my home, framing it as though she'd done me a favor simply by being my sibling. It was clear she hadn't changed one bit and had no interest in making things right. I took this message to my lawyer, who advised me to start taking further precautions. He suggested I install security measures around my home and begin gathering evidence in case I needed to pursue a restraining order. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie, but I realized these were steps I had to take to protect myself. The next day, it happened. My parents and sister showed up uninvited at my property, standing outside the front gate and demanding to be let in. They were loud enough to attract attention from neighbors, causing a scene right there on my doorstep. They shouted about how I was abandoning them and insisted they had a right to see me. Not wanting a confrontation, I called security. When security asked them to leave, my parents argued, insisting that I had to let them in because they were family. When security escorted them off the property, they caused a scene, drawing the attention of neighbors. After they finally left, a few neighbors came by, offering supportive words. They had witnessed the whole ordeal, and some even shared their own experiences with entitled family members. It felt reassuring to have people around who understood and didn't judge me for standing my ground. Later that evening, I updated Reddit on everything that had happened, sharing how things had spiraled and the lengths my family was willing to go to guilt me into submission. The responses were overwhelming, with hundreds of people offering advice, sympathy, and even legal guidance on protecting myself from further harassment. Many users shared similar stories, letting me know I wasn't alone and that others had managed to get through similar situations. Amidst the chaos, I took a step back to reflect on my family dynamic. Looking at it objectively, it became clear that my sister had likely been used as a pawn away from my parents to maintain control. They had set her up as the favored one, handing her everything without accountability, while pushing me into the role of the family's financial backup plan. But now, after years of manipulation, that arrangement was falling apart, leaving them scrambling. I finally felt a sense of resolve. It was time to put an end to this once and for all. I wasn't going to let them control my life anymore, and I was done playing the role they had forced on me. I posted a brief, straightforward message on my own social media, stating that my boundaries were final and asking for privacy. I updated all my emergency contacts and passwords, ensuring my family couldn't exploit any loopholes to reach me. For the first time, I felt completely in control of my life and privacy. Then came a final message from my sister, who managed to contact me one last time through an unblocked number. She accused me of destroying the family and blamed me for everyone's suffering. Her message was filled with anger and desperation, but I didn't respond. It was clear she hadn't changed and was still clinging to the narrative my parents had built. Ignoring the message was difficult, but I knew responding would only drag me back into the chaos. In the days that followed, I finally experienced a sense of calm. There were no more messages, no surprise visits, and no guilt trips. My home, once filled with tension and dread, became a true sanctuary. I spent mornings enjoying coffee on the porch and evenings unwinding without the constant pull of family drama. My space finally felt like mine. Counseling became a place of closure and reflection. In our sessions, my therapist and I went through everything that had happened, and I began to see how setting boundaries had transformed me. I had started this journey feeling obligated to be there for my family, no matter the cost to myself. But now I understood that protecting my peace didn't make me selfish. I was finally building the confidence and independence I had always been denied. With my family no longer a distraction, I refocused on my career. I accepted a challenging new project at work that reminded me why I loved what I did. My boss, who knew a bit about what I'd been through, was supportive and gave me the chance to lead the project. The feeling of focusing on my goals without the emotional toll of family issues weighing me down was liberating. I also began expanding my social circle, spending more time with friends who genuinely supported me. I met new people, built meaningful connections, and started filling my life with relationships that felt genuine and uplifting. These people celebrated my successes and offered real support, the kind I had never felt from my family. It was a new feeling, one I embraced wholeheartedly. Even some extended family members reached out, expressing respect for my decision. They acknowledged my family's behavior and assured me they'd be there if I ever wanted to reconnect. It was a relief to know I didn't have to lose everyone to find peace. These relatives became a source of quiet support, people who understood my journey and stood by me without judgment. I posted a final update on Reddit, expressing gratitude to the community. The support I'd received from strangers had been an anchor during some of my darkest moments. Reading their words, hearing their similar stories, and knowing others had been through this kind of family struggle made all the difference. I thanked them for their advice, encouragement, and the strength they'd unknowingly given me. With this chapter closing, I started thinking about my long-term goals. My life was finally mine to shape, free from anyone's demands or expectations. I began planning for the future, dreaming of new places to travel, projects I wanted to pursue, and the kind of life I wanted to build. For the first time, I felt excited about the possibilities. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I took a deep breath, releasing the past. This journey had shown me what true independence looked like, and I knew I'd never go back to the life I'd left behind. I had finally closed the door on my family's hold over me, choosing a new path defined by self-respect, independence, and strength.